Hey guys, Melvin here. Welcome to the attic. We're going to be reading a story from the RPG Horror Stories subreddit. This one was posted by user Celagas. It's about a DM who must randomly roll to resolve every single decision and action, as if they themselves were role-playing as an automaton, generating the campaign according to the parameters of their coded AI. Their only weakness? Anything that doesn't require a dice roll. I just wanted to take a second to say, lately we've been steadily growing as a channel, and I wanted to thank you all for being here. From the OGs who have been here for months, to the new attic dwellers that have come along, I really appreciate you all stopping by and hanging out. As of this video's posting, we're fast approaching 500 subscribers, so if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to know when I upload new videos. Without further ado, let's check it out. TLDR, I had a DM that could not do anything off the top of his head. Literally everything was a random roll. He hated my character for having and using my persuasion skill, and ended the campaign with a screaming rant over it. So, to set the stage, this was a D&D 5e game I played with my cousin, a friend of his, and a DM friend of his who I'll call Randy. My cousin and the other player barely play a role in the story outside of being present for these games, so they'll go unnamed. So as the story goes, Randy let us know we are going to be playing in a game where we are exploring a new land and had been granted the rights to set up a base of operations. It would eventually grow into a small town that we would largely fund and build through the use of connections with ship captains and any treasure we found exploring the island. The game was supposed to alternate between us contacting and buying from various ship captains, then adventuring in the days to weeks it took for supplies and manpower to arrive. My cousin played some sort of frontliner, probably a damage dealer. I forget. The other player picked a samurai subclass for the fighter. I figured since everyone was focused on dishing out damage up close, that I should be someone who covered a lot of other bases. I decided on being a divine soul sorcerer so I could focus on using the twin spell metamagic and access to 2 separate spell lists to pick up every useful buff, healing, and support spell I could for the 2 frontliners, while rounding out the damage with some cantrips. I went with the Aasimar subrace that gives you temporary wings, so I had an easy out in dangerous situations, and because I felt it was thematic to my character concept. I also focused my character's skills on diplomacy, since I figured we'd need to negotiate contracts, trade routes, hire people, etc. I let Randy know this, and he said, yeah, that made sense, and supposedly approved. Little did I know at the time, my decision to focus my skills on diplomacy would sour Randy's opinion of me. Just as an interesting side tangent, I want to go into a quirk of Randy's DMing style. I quickly learned that he preferred to do everything procedurally. When I say everything, I mean everything. The initial island we landed on and based ourselves off of had a set max size it could be on the hex grid map. And every time we moved to explore a hex, Randy would roll to determine what each surrounding hex was, using markers to draw as the fog of war was lifted. Every random encounter was literally random and rolled for from a table. Every character we ran into was rolled off of a table, along with their personality, purpose, class, reason for living. Randy could not seem to make a single decision that did not come out of the hundreds of tables on laminated sheets that he kept in a 3-ring binder that was thick and heavy enough to beat a fucking goat to death with. In fact, his compulsion to roll for everything was so bad that it leaked into the role-playing aspect of the game. Anytime I tried to roleplay and use diplomacy, Randy would not ask me to roll persuasion, deception, or any similar roll. Instead, he'd roll a dice to see what disposition the person had, what type of response they'd give, or if they were just lunatics and outright attacked us. Whenever I reminded him that skill checks for social skills existed, he'd frown and pause for a long moment. You could see his face twist with what I now realize was probably disdain. He'd then begrudgingly allow me to roll, but then would make his own roll behind the screen, Presumably, this was in opposition of mine to determine if I succeeded, rather than, assigning a DC based on difficulty like a sane person. This approach to diplomacy meant that even ignoring my character's skills and using my own social skills built up over nearly a decade of call center and customer service work spent verbally disarming, calming, and persuading hostile people were useless in the face of his rolling obsession. His response to logical, rational argument was the sound of dice rolling behind the screen. 56. The trader considers your words for a moment before he simply spits on you in reply. I was offering to overpay on goods to build friendly rapport. 12. He summons his guards, deeply offended at your appearance, and orders your death. Okay, the interaction is hyperbole. It's been too long to remember specific scenarios, but the literal constant roll of the dice between responses is not. Worse, anytime I somehow manage to solve a situation peacefully, get us new allies, disarm hostile situations, and the like, he would never give us a reward for it. For him, our reward was letting us get out of the fight without losing resources. XP was for murderers. Period. If you didn't kill stuff, you didn't level, you didn't get treasure, you just now had a bunch of useless NPCs hanging around. And if you tried to negotiate or trade with them, he'd just start rolling dice behind the screen again, and there was a solid chance they'd just revert right back to being hostile, because the roll table said so. After half a dozen sessions of this, my annoyance with this style of play was starting to claw its way to the surface. It was like being DM'd by an AI that had barely managed to pass the Turing test. Before it could fester into something worse, I decided to finally ask Randy why he didn't like to reward us any experience for solving situations without incredible violence. His initial defense was that none of those had experience values stapled to them like monsters did, and he didn't feel we deserved experience for doing nothing. Further, he felt like using social skills to overcome a challenge was cheating, and that we were getting out of it too easy. I pointed out that social challenges were just a part of the game. Any real person would attempt at least cautious diplomacy if they met another person who could talk, especially with two muscleheads standing between them and trouble. There were plenty of monsters that couldn't be reasoned with that we were already killing in spades. Actual sentient people were a potential resource to us. We needed bodies to build and guard our port. We needed locals to trade with. We needed allies to lean on. My rationalization was that diplomacy was honestly a reasonable, rational step in setting up in a new, unexplored land, and that the way things were currently playing out, that resource was kind of worthless. The other players chimed in with half-hearted agreement, a nod and a grunt. That's about as much as I could have expected, honestly, since they'd built themselves to fill out combat, dungeoneering, and survival roles mostly. Regardless of how their social roles were done, it was a crapshoot for them either way with no charisma or social skills. Randy though? Oh, Randy was absolutely livid. You could see the thunder rumbling as storm clouds built up behind his eyes. I'd somehow stirred up a shitstorm. He abruptly went on a long, red-faced rant that gradually ramped up to a shrill, screaming fit about how much he hated social characters. Hated them. He hated the concept of characters built and min-maxed to bypass everything with skills, spells, subclasses, and stats all bent towards the purpose of outmaneuvering any potential hostile situation. Words like bullshit, cheating, and min-maxing were spat out as he explained that such characters were an anathema to how the game was supposed to be played. In the middle of this, he diverged into a side tangent. He brought up how this was a big problem in D&D 3.5 and put forth a character concept known as a diplomancer, some unholy theoretical mixture of multiclassing, prestige classing, min-maxing, and spell stacking that allowed a player to get a triple-digit bonus to whatever social role they wanted. This presumably allowed them to basically always succeed in basically warping societal reality with their words. He went on and on about how such players absolutely ruined the game and completely destroyed the spirit of D&D. At this point, I should underline that we were playing 5e, not 3.5. And while I had a high charisma and proficiency in persuasion, it was purely because it aligned with my class. I didn't even have enchantment or utility spells outside of combat buffs, because the sorcerer's known spell list is criminally small. I was honestly better at keeping people alive and beefing them up than diplomacy. I was just presenting my case because I literally felt like my skill investment and role-playing were being squandered, and was struggling to reconcile that with the completely random and inconsistent characters I was made to interact with. I originally fully intended to concede to him if he shot me down, just so the game could keep going and everyone could remain cordial. Instead, what I got was a very repetitive, very long, very loud rant. He seemed to run out of gas at some point and just sort of ended in the middle of a random ranting point, as if he had internally rolled to determine when to stop. I'm almost convinced he somehow did. By the end of it, the rest of the table was kind of silent and stiffly eyeing one another. Not one set of lips asked it, but our eyes collectively voiced it. Did that just happen? Randy had the good sense to calmly close his bloated binder of random tables, announce we would be ending the session there, and we all sort of collectively filtered out of the house. I don't think any of us heard anything from him regarding that campaign ever again. Good riddance, I guess. DMs like this are always a head-scratcher to me. I'm not sure why they would go to the trouble of investing so much effort in an RPG where the potential for conflict resolution can include not hitting things. In my opinion, the main strength of D&D over other tabletop RPGs is the combat, particularly in 5e where it tends to flow rather smoothly. But having variety and maneuverability for different approaches definitely helps keeps the game fresh, especially for the reasons that OP stated. If the DM was so opposed to any kind of non-combat in the game, that's definitely something that should have been cleared up beforehand. Or another type of game might be a better fit, like a skirmish war game. This also leads into the DM's habit of having to roll for every single outcome in the game. To most of us on the outside, this is clearly a limitation. Adaptability is a DM's best friend, even more so than knowing the rules super well. Rules can always be looked up, but being able to take what your players give you and work with it is a far more critical skill to develop. For one thing, it encourages players to be creative and keeps them engaged with the game. It's a shame, because the concept for this campaign actually sounds very interesting. I've been dipping my toe into One Piece lately, and this idea gave me some serious buccaneering vibes. Hopefully this DM can come around to realizing that this smooth-talking straw man that lives rent-free in their head is more of a them thing and not so much players trying to find loopholes around their airtight system of dice-powered automation. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining me here in the attic, and take care of yourselves out there. This is Melvin, in the attic, signing out.